The first section of your chapter on federalism discusses the roots of the federal system. This lecture video will highlight some of the key concepts on this topic. Federalism is characterized by a power-sharing arrangement among different levels of government. In the United States, those levels of government are the states and the national government, which somewhat confusingly is also referred to as the federal government. Federalism in the United States is structured by the U.S. Constitution. This document defines the arrangement of powers between the states and the federal government. In some cases, this means the different levels of government have the power to operate independently from one another. In other cases, it means they have the power to work together in the same areas, with neither level able to completely dictate to the other. Federalism is one of the innovations of government design developed by the framers of the United States Constitution. It was the first document to lay out this type of power-sharing arrangement between levels of government. But it has caught on internationally to some degree in the 2+ centuries since it was adopted. The countries in green on the map in this slide are the ones that currently have federal systems. You'll see that federalism is particularly prevalent in countries with large populations and land areas, such as the United States, Mexico, Canada, Brazil, and Argentina in the Western Hemisphere, as well as Russia, India, and Nigeria in the Eastern Hemisphere. Countries with large populations and land areas also tend to be places with a lot of regional diversity, so it makes sense that people in those countries would want to maintain some independent decision-making power for the lower levels of government. The figure on the right-hand side of this slide shows how federalism differs from other types of systems. As you can see up top, the people are directly connected to both the states and the national government in a federal system. In other words, both levels of government derive their power directly from the people. This is different from a unitary system, which is actually the much more common approach to structuring government throughout the world. In a unitary system, the national government derives its power from the people, but the smaller units of government are dependent upon the national government for its powers. In this type of system, lower levels of government are still important. They carry out key functions, but they can only exercise powers given to them by the national government. Finally, the bottom part of this slide depicts a confederate system. This is the type of arrangement that governed the United States under the Articles of Confederation, in which the states derived their powers directly from the people, and then the states formed a loose league in which the national government only had the powers given to it by the states. This type of system is not very widespread among countries of the world, although there are international organizations, such as the United Nations and the European Union, which follow the model of a confederate system. So why did the framers of the Constitution choose a federal system? Well, Revolution-era Americans had a very negative experience living under the British unitary system, where all power resided with the central government. They felt this government had become too distant from and indifferent to the particular interests and needs of the colonists. So that was a model the framers were not interested in repeating. On the other hand, the experience of the new United States under the Articles of Confederation had also been problematic, as we discussed in last week's module. The Articles created such a weak central government that they exacerbated economic problems, left the country weak in providing for the common defense, and proved unable to handle domestic turmoil. So at the Constitutional Convention, there was general agreement that the United States needed to find a compromise and try something in between an ultra-powerful national government under a unitary system and a far too weak national government under a confederacy. But the devil is really in the details. There was a lot of disagreement over where that just right in-between balance lied. The specifics of this in-between were left somewhat vague and ambiguous in the wording of the Constitution, so that people with differing views on governmental power would still agree to the Constitution. Once the document was ratified, there was almost immediately conflict over where the balance of this in-between arrangement lies. Federalists, such as Alexander Hamilton and John Marshall, argued for a very strong version of national supremacy, in which the Constitution should be interpreted in such a way as to give the federal government very broad powers. On the other side, politicians including Thomas Jefferson and John C. Calhoun argued for a much more restrictive reading of the Constitution, in which they viewed the document as a compact or agreement amongst the states, in which the states could overturn unwanted actions by the federal government, or even leave the Union altogether. It ultimately took the Civil War to settle that particular question, but we still have conflict today over what is the right balance of power between the federal government and the states. The next video will help give some context to this debate by examining what the Constitution actually says in regards to state and national powers.